Chains of Silence, Women in Ancient Civilizations. In the earliest chapters of human history, women lived beneath the weight of tradition and law. Ancient civilizations rose with magnificent temples, mighty armies, and powerful kings. But behind these achievements stood millions of women whose lives were confined to the home, the field, and the shadows of society. In Mesopotamia, Greece, Rome, and the Indus Valley, women were often treated as property. Their value was measured by marriage, childbirth, and obedience. Education was reserved for men. Leadership was forbidden to women. Silence was expected, and submission was praised as virtue. Yet history does not tell the whole truth. Even in societies that chained women with laws and customs, some women rose above their limits. Their stories were dangerous, so they were hidden. Their achievements were rewritten, and their names were erased. But traces of their courage survived through ruins, broken texts, and whispered legends. In ancient Egypt, women enjoyed slightly more freedom than in other civilizations. They could inherit property and sometimes hold positions of power. The greatest example of this was Hatshepsut, a woman who dared to become pharaoh in a world ruled by men. She wore the crown of kings, claimed divine authority, and governed Egypt with wisdom and peace. Under her rule, trade flourished and monuments were built. But after her death, her statues were smashed and her name carved out of walls, as if history itself wanted to punish her for daring to rule as a woman. Another queen of Egypt would face a similar fate centuries later. Cleopatra is remembered today as a symbol of beauty and romance. Yet she was far more than that. She spoke several languages, understood politics deeply, and ruled during one of Egypt's most dangerous periods. She negotiated with Roman generals and defended her kingdom against foreign domination. Still, history turned her into a scandal instead of a strategist. Her intelligence was overshadowed by stories written by her enemies, men who feared a woman with power. In ancient Greece, the birthplace of democracy and philosophy, women were excluded from public life. They were not allowed to vote, attend assemblies, or study philosophy. Their world was confined to the home. Yet even in this prison of silence, a woman's voice rose through poetry. Sappho wrote about love, sorrow, and the inner lives of women. Her words were so powerful that later societies tried to destroy them. Her poems were labeled immoral, and much of her work was burned. Only fragments survived, proof that women had always felt, thought, and dreamed beyond the limits imposed on them. In Rome, women could not rule openly, but they shaped emperors from behind closed doors. Mothers trained future rulers. Wives advised generals. Their influence was invisible but essential. History praised the men while forgetting the women who guided them. Across the ancient world, women were bound by invisible chains. These chains were not always made of iron. They were made of customs, beliefs, and fear. A woman who spoke too loudly was seen as dangerous. A woman who learned too much was seen as unnatural. A woman who led was seen as sinful. Yet resistance lived quietly. Women became healers, storytellers, and guardians of culture. They preserved knowledge through songs, rituals, and family traditions. They taught children when schools rejected them. They passed wisdom from generation to generation when books were denied to them. Their struggle was not fought with swords or armies. It was fought with patience, with memory, with survival. The ancient world tried to make women invisible, but invisibility did not mean absence. It meant endurance. It meant waiting for a future that would allow their voices to rise. This chapter of history is not only about suffering, it is about strength hidden beneath silence. Every civilization that claimed greatness was also built on the unseen labor and unrecorded courage of women. They were queens without crowns, thinkers without schools, leaders without titles. Their chains were real, but so was their spirit. And from these silent beginnings, a long journey would begin. A journey from shadows into light, from silence into speech, from chains into crowns. Fire in the shadows, medieval women who defied fate. The Middle Ages were ruled by fear and faith. Castles rose above villages, kings ruled by force, and the church shaped every corner of daily life. For women, the world was narrow and unforgiving. Their destiny was decided at birth: to marry, to obey, and to remain silent. Education was forbidden to most. Power was dangerous. Independence was treated as rebellion. A woman who questioned authority was seen as a threat. A woman who showed intelligence was suspected of witchcraft. A woman who led was considered unnatural. Yet even in this age of darkness, flames of courage began to rise. In a small French village, a teenage girl claimed to hear voices from heaven. She was not educated. She was not noble. She was not meant to matter. But she believed she had a mission: to save her country from foreign rule. Her name was Joan of Arc. At just 17 years old, Joan wore armor and rode into battle beside soldiers twice her age. She inspired fear in enemies and hope in her people. The French army followed her into war and reclaimed lost territory. For a moment, a peasant girl became the face of a nation's courage. But society could not forgive her for stepping outside her role. She was captured, put on trial, and accused of heresy. Her crime was not disobedience to God, it was disobedience to men. She was burned alive in the public square. Years later, the same church that condemned her declared her a saint. Her story became a symbol of both injustice and bravery. Joan's fate was not unique. Across Europe, women who challenged the system paid a terrible price. Many were accused of witchcraft simply for knowing how to heal the sick or refusing to bow to authority. The word witch became a weapon used to silence women who thought differently. Yet some women fought with crowns instead of swords. One of the most powerful figures of medieval Europe was Eleanor of Aquitaine. She was queen of both France and England and ruled vast lands at a time when women were expected to remain hidden behind curtains of obedience. Eleanor supported poets, scholars, and political reform. She advised kings and even led troops during the Crusades. When her own husband tried to imprison her for rebelling against his authority, she survived years in captivity. She emerged not broken, but stronger, guiding the future kings of England and shaping the politics of Europe. Her power was dangerous because it proved something society feared: that a woman could rule with wisdom, strategy, and ambition. Far from Europe, another woman challenged tradition in a different world. In the 13th century, the Delhi Sultanate was ruled by warriors and nobles who believed leadership belonged only to men. Then came Razia Sultana, the first and only woman to rule the empire. She wore male clothing, rode into battle, and sat on the throne as sultan, not queen. She tried to bring justice and stability to her people, but her reign was constantly threatened by powerful men who refused to accept a woman as their ruler. Religious leaders opposed her. Nobles plotted against her. Eventually, she was overthrown and killed, not because she failed, but because she dared to succeed. Her story reveals a cruel truth of the medieval world. A woman could be brilliant, brave, and capable, and still be destroyed for being a woman. Most medieval women never became queens or warriors. Their battles were quieter. They worked fields, raised families, and survived under laws that denied them control over their own lives. They were married as children. They were punished for speaking freely. They lived under the constant fear of judgment. Yet, courage lived in ordinary lives too. Women preserved culture through songs and stories. They healed the sick when doctors refused. They taught daughters what the world would not. Their resistance was not loud, but it was lasting. The medieval era tried to bury women beneath fear, religion, and law. But fear could not erase their spirit. Faith could not destroy their will. Power could not silence their memory. These women were fire in the shadows. They burned quietly, but their light traveled through centuries. They proved that leadership did not belong to one gender, that courage did not wear only armor, that even in an age of darkness, women shaped the future. And from these flames of resistance, a new age would rise. An age where women would no longer fight only for survival, but for rights, education, and equality. The shadows were beginning to crack. The chains were beginning to weaken. And the journey from silence to strength had truly begun. Breaking the chains, education, rights, and revolution. The world began to change in the 17th and 18th centuries. Empires expanded, science awakened minds, and new ideas about freedom and equality spread across continents. This age was called the Enlightenment, a time when people spoke of human rights and reason. But those words were written mostly for men. Women were still denied education. They were excluded from politics. Their lives remained defined by marriage and obedience. Society claimed that women were weak, emotional, and unfit for leadership. These beliefs were treated as natural law. But for the first time in history, women began to challenge those laws with words instead of whispers. In 1792, a British writer dared to question the foundation of inequality. Mary Wollstonecraft published A Vindication of the Rights of Woman. In her book, she argued that women were not inferior by nature, they were made inferior by lack of education. She believed that if women were taught to think, they could become equal partners in society, not servants within it. Her ideas shocked Europe. Many called her dangerous. Some called her immoral. But her words traveled far beyond her lifetime, planting the first seeds of modern feminism. Across the Atlantic, another struggle was unfolding. Slavery divided America, and women, especially Black women, suffered under double chains of race and gender. From this suffering rose one of the most powerful voices of the 19th century, Sojourner Truth. Born into slavery, she escaped and became a traveling speaker. In 1851, she stood before a crowd and asked a simple but revolutionary question, "Ain't I a woman?" With those words, she shattered the belief that women were weak and dependent. She had worked like a man, suffered like a man, and still claimed her womanhood with pride. Her speeches connected two movements, abolition and women's rights, showing the world that freedom must belong to everyone or it belongs to no one. As the 19th century progressed, the fight for women's rights took a new form, the right to vote. Voting meant voice. Voice meant power. And power was what society feared women would gain. One of the most determined fighters for this cause was Susan B. Anthony. She spent her entire life organizing protests, giving speeches, and demanding political equality. In 1872, she voted illegally in a U.S. election and was arrested for it. When the judge fined her, she refused to pay, turning her trial into a symbol of resistance. Newspapers mocked suffragists. Politicians ignored them. Churches condemned them. Women who marched were called unfeminine and dangerous. Yet the movement grew stronger with every insult and every prison sentence. The Industrial Revolution changed society in unexpected ways. As factories expanded, women entered the workforce in large numbers. They worked long hours for low wages, but their presence in public life transformed old traditions. Women became teachers, nurses, and writers. Education slowly opened its doors. Wars also changed the balance. When men went to battle, women ran farms, businesses, and hospitals. They proved that they could manage societies as well as families. Their contribution could no longer be denied. Still, progress came at a cost. Women were beaten during protests. Some were force-fed in prison during hunger strikes. Many lost their families and reputations for daring to demand equality. Their struggle was not glamorous. It was painful, slow, and often lonely. But chains were breaking, not with swords, but with books. Not with armies, but with ideas. Not with violence, but with voices. By the early 20th century, women in several countries finally gained the right to vote. Universities began admitting female students. Laws slowly recognized women as citizens, not property. For the first time in history, women were not only surviving the world, they were shaping it. This chapter of the journey was a revolution of the mind. It proved that education could challenge centuries of tradition, that a single speech could awaken millions, that one book could change the future. The fight was not over. Inequality still lived in laws and customs, but something had shifted forever. Women had learned the power of unity. They had learned the strength of knowledge. They had learned that silence was no longer their destiny. The chains of the past were cracking. The doors of the future were opening. And a new era was ready to begin. An era where women would step not only into classrooms and polling stations, but into leadership, science, and global history. The revolution had begun, and there was no turning back. From chains to crowns, modern women who changed the world. The 20th century arrived with storms of change. 2 world wars, scientific revolutions, and global movements reshaped human history. For women, this new age opened doors that had been locked for thousands of years. Classrooms replaced kitchens as centers of ambition. Parliaments replaced silence. Laboratories replaced limitations. Yet freedom did not come easily. Women entered public life carrying the weight of centuries of prejudice. They were told they did not belong in science, politics, or leadership. But step by step, they proved the world wrong. One of the greatest symbols of this transformation was Marie Curie. Born in Poland, she traveled to France to study at a time when women were rarely allowed into scientific institutions. She faced poverty, discrimination, and isolation. Yet her curiosity was stronger than fear. She discovered radioactivity and became the first person in history to win 2 Nobel Prizes in 2 different sciences. Her work revolutionized medicine and saved millions of lives through cancer treatment and X-ray technology. Still, she was often denied recognition by male colleagues who believed science belonged only to men. Marie Curie showed the world that intelligence had no gender and that knowledge could be a crown earned through perseverance. While science changed bodies, courage changed societies. In 1955, in the United States, a quiet woman made a decision that would echo through history. Rosa Parks refused to give up her seat on a segregated bus to a white man. This simple act of defiance sparked the civil rights movement. Rosa Parks was not powerful in wealth or status. She was powerful in principle. Her refusal challenged laws built on injustice and inspired millions to stand against discrimination. She proved that resistance did not always need loud voices or armies. Sometimes it only needed one person who refused to move. Across the world, new generations of women began to rise in politics, culture, and education. Women became prime ministers, presidents, and diplomats. They entered universities in record numbers. They became doctors, engineers, and astronauts. Yet in many places, girls were still denied education and freedom. Violence and fear remained tools used to silence them. In the 21st century, the voice of a young girl reminded the world that the struggle was not finished. Malala Yousafzai grew up in Pakistan where extremist groups tried to prevent girls from going to school. She spoke publicly for the right to education and was shot for her courage. The bullet did not silence her, it amplified her voice across the globe. Malala survived and became the youngest Nobel Peace Prize winner in history. She stood before world leaders and demanded what should never have been denied: books instead of bullets, classrooms instead of fear. Her story showed that, even today, a girl's desire to learn can be seen as revolutionary. Modern women also transformed culture and thought. Writers, artists, and journalists reshaped how societies understood gender and identity. Athletes broke records once believed impossible for women. Scientists explored space. Entrepreneurs built global empires. Still, the shadows of the past remained. Women continued to face unequal pay, political exclusion, and violence. In many countries, their rights were fragile, easily challenged by tradition and power. The journey from chains to crowns was not a straight road. It was filled with victories and setbacks. But something had changed forever. For the first time in history, women were not only part of the story, they were writing it. The crown of modern women was not made of gold or jewels. It was made of education, of courage, of choice. Where ancient women had been forced into silence, modern women spoke on global stages. Where medieval women had been punished for leadership, modern women were elected to lead nations. Where revolutionary women had fought for the right to vote, modern women used that vote to shape laws and futures. Each generation stood on the shoulders of the last. Hatshepsut's erased statues. Joan of Arc's ashes. Wollstonecraft's banned books. Susan B. Anthony's prison cell. All became stepping stones toward freedom. The journey from chains to crowns is not finished. Millions of women still fight for safety, education, and equality. The crown is still being forged by students, workers, mothers, and leaders across the world. But history has turned a page. Women are no longer only survivors of history. They are its architects. They are its voice. They are its future. And the crown they wear today is not a symbol of domination. It is a symbol of dignity earned through centuries of struggle. From silence to speech. From shadows to sunlight. From chains to crowns. The journey continues.